All right, so hello, a pleasant afternoon to each and everyone. Yours truly, Mary Grace Mejias, a second year political science student from the University of Caloocan City. So, this video lecture tends to inform you or teach you about the things you should know about the country of Canada. Without further ado, let's start. So for the next slide, let me show you about the questions that running out on my mind while I'm preparing this video lecture. So first, what is the history of the country's government? What is the population rate? What is the economic system? Does this country have a debt? If so, how much? Does the country have a constitution? What is its major export? And lastly, is it a democracy or a dictatorship? Is it unitary, federal, parliamentary, presidential, or what? Okay, so let's start with the Canadian government history. So, formally, Canada is a constitutional monarchy. The titular head is the reigning monarch of the United Kingdom, which is locally called as the King or Queen of Canada, who is represented locally by a Governor General, or now always Canadian and appointed by the Canadian Prime Minister. In practice, however, Canada is an independent federal state established in the year 1867 by the British North American Act, which created the Dominion of Canada consisting of four provinces, such as New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Quebec, and Ontario, with its first Prime Minister, John A. MacDonald. Well, I am not showing you the pictures or such quite informations about the first ever Prime Minister because first and foremost in this video, I would like to highlight the current Prime Minister of this country. So, some aspects of the Canadian government remain under control of the British government, but Canada acted as an independent country for the most part. The British North American Act provided Canada with its own constitution, meaning to say this country has its own constitution that is adopted by the British government. Well, the act gave the federal government the power to create economic policy such as trade, commerce, and banking institution. The provincial governments were given responsibility for areas of a local and private nature such as education and health. The act also gave the Canadian Parliament the power to create new provinces out of territories. So there are currently 10 provinces and 3 territories with the most recent territory. So the Constitution Act or the 1982 ended Canadians' need for the British Parliament to pass constitutional amendments and enacted the Charter of the Rights and Freedom which guarantees certain civil rights and freedom. It is quite looks like in the Philippine government. And lastly, Canadian Constitution set forth the system of fundamental laws and principles that outline the nature, functions, and limits of Canada's system of government, both federal and provincial. It's prescribed which power legislative, executive, and judicial may be exercised by which level of government, and it sets limits on those powers. Well, it is also lay out the powers and authorities of the office of the Governor General as well as those of the Senate and the House of Commons. Well, that's the quick informations that you should know about the history of Canadian's government. So, next, let's proceed about the Canada population. So as of Saturday, January 1, 2022, the Canadians' population ranges 38,247,262. Well, the Canadians' 2022 population is only estimated at 37,742,000,000 and 154 people at mid-year. That is according to the United Nations data. Well, actually, the Canadians' population is also equivalent to 0.48% of the total world population. And also, Canada ranks number 39 in the list of countries and dependencies by population. And also, 81.3% of the population is urban, or about 13,670,000,000 and 64 people in the year 2020. So as you can see, it is just a 1 million more than 2020 21 to 2022. So I guess they not belong to the overpopulation country, no. So next, let's proceed about the economy of Canada. Well, actually, the Canada's economy is highly developed and one of the largest in the world. In the year 2020, the country's annual gross domestic product, or also known as GDP, was about 1.64 trillion dollars. And Canada's economy is highly dependent on international trade with exports and imports. And Canada is actually a home to the e-commerce company Shopify Incorporation, or also known as Shop to Shop, which is the major bank such as the Royal Bank of Canada, and energy transportation and the distribution company Enbridge Incorporation. Well, actually, during the COVID-19 pandemic, caused by Canada's economy to pull back sharply in the first half of 2020 before rebounding in the latter half of the year. Because in the second quarter of 2020, the real GDP fell out of 11.3% quarter over quarter. Okay? That's quarter over quarter. And in the third quarter of the year, they ranges 2.2 quarter over quarter for the last or the fourth quarter of 2020. Well, actually, it's something like offsetting because the decline earlier in the year because of the real GDP was up to 0.3% in the first quarter of 2021 compared to the first quarter of 2022. The increase is first quarter GDP was fueled in part by low mortgage rates and rising housing demand, and such government transfers to household and businesses. Okay, so let's proceed to the Canadians government debt. So as you can see in my slide, no more almost 354.2 billion dollars has been lifted as a debt of this country as of April 2021. Well, actually, the government's debt is commonly measured based on its shares of the economy using the gross domestic product, or the GDP. And the debt to GDP ratio is useful in a way to compare the government's debt between the difference of the jurisdiction and the evaluate of the sustainability of government debt accumulation. And the budget deficit and the growth of government debt have recently re-emerged as key fiscal challenges facing Canadians government. Well, actually, the debt has risen significantly for the federal and provincial government since the year of 2008 to 2009 recession. But there was a particular sharp spike in debt in levels in the year 2020 due to the COVID-19 outbreak. Such such provinces like Alberta, Manitoba, and specifically the Ontario has not balanced their debt in a years. And why I am telling you about the Canadian's government debt? So because the government's debt is one of the major problem in of this country. So why government or why growing government debt is a problem? So we have four reasons for that. First is the long-term interest rates can rise when government's debt expands, which increase the cost of borrowing into the private sector. Second is higher borrowing costs can reduce the incentive for private capital investment. Third is the declining investments levels then pose great challenges to the country's ability to enhance productivity and can reduce future economic performance. And lastly, the growing debt can also governments to raise taxes to pay back the debt or finance their interest payments, which is in turns the economic growth. Well, the interest payments or the debt servicing costs are another consequence of debt accumulation, such as the household. The governments are required to pay interest on their debt. The revenues directed towards interest payments leave less money available for government programs such as healthcare, education, social services, or even the tax relief. Okay, so for the major value of this video lecture, let's answer the following question. Who is the leader of this country? Who is his or her title? How does he or she chosen? What political party he or she belong? What do these parties represent? What is the structure of the government based on its constitution? Does it have one or several branches? What are they? And lastly, what are their function? Where are the executive, legislative, and judiciary powers held? Okay, so the next slide, let's first introduce the Prime Minister or the current Prime Minister of this country, which is Justin Pierre James Trudeau. So as you can see in my slides, he is born on December 25, 1971, the 23rd Prime Minister, an advocator of real and fair chance to succeed for young people and the environment, graduate of Bachelor of Arts on 1994, completed an education program at the University of British Columbia. He spent several years in teaching French, math, and other subjects in Vancouver. Former chair of Katimavik on the board of Canadian Avalanche Foundation, and lastly, a representative of Liberal Party. Well, actually, Justin Pierre James Trudeau encouraged young people to engage with the issues important to them and participate as an active citizen. So these experiences of him was made it increasingly clear that the issues of young Canadians care about, such as educations, environment, and their generation's economic prospects needed a stronger voice. Well, Justin's entered politics to make change that would better serve all Canadians in the year 2007. He also built a community-based grassroots campaign to win the Liberal Party nomination. Take note, he is part of the Liberal Party nomination in the Montreal riding of Papineau. He was elected in the year 2008 and re-elected in the year 2011, 2015, and lastly 2019. Justin was elected leader of the Liberal Party in April 2013, and with that, his leadership represented a campaign focused on building a new truly national movement or progressive Canadians bringing hundreds of thousands of Canadians into politics most for the first time. He also worked closely with his team to build a plan to create jobs, grow the economy, protect the environment, and strengthen the middle class. With Justin's leadership, the Liberal plan emphasized fair economic opportunities for everyone's respect for and promotion of freedom and diversity, and a more democratic government that truly represents all the Canadian citizens. And as a prime minister, Justin leads a government that works hard every day to continue moving Canada forward. His team is focused on creating good middle class jobs, fighting climate change, and moving forward on reconciliation with Indigenous people. A proud feminist, Justin's appointed Canada's first gender balanced cabinet. Okay, so let's proceed to the structure of the government based on its constitution. So let's first discuss about the crown or the head of the states represented in Canada by the Governor General. Well, actually, in Canada, the executive authority is formally vested in the crown, or also known as the sovereign, and it is exercised in its name by the Governor General, acting on the advice of the Prime Minister and the Cabinet. Well, actually, the constitutions reserve certain prerogatives of government for the crown, including the powers to first give a royal recommendation to bill that propose to spend government revenues, give royal assents to bill passed by the Senate and the House of Commons so that they become a law. Third is the appoint holders of many important offices, such as the judicial and the diplomatic. Fourth is to dissolve parliament before election and to open and close parliamentary session at the beginning of each parliamentary session. The Governor General read the speech from the throne prepared by the Prime Minister, outlining the government's objective for the upcoming session, and lastly, to choose the prime minister by convention, that the leader of the country with the most seats in the House of Commons following an election. To further understand the role of the Governor General, that is actually appointed by the Queen on the recommendation of the Prime Minister for a tenure of usually 5 years, which may be extended at the discretion of the sovereign. And as the sovereign's representative, the Governor General is the Commander in Chief of the Canadian Armed Forces and performs several ceremonial functions and represents Canada in state visits and in other international events. Okay, so let's proceed to the legislative branch, which is the Parliament, and the legislative branch is composed of the Senate and the House of Commons. As you can see, and as you observe this slide presentation, it is actually have a common in our government, which is the Philippines, because in this country we also have legislative branch, and it is also divided into Senate and the House of Representative. But here in Canadian Constitution, it is the House of Commons, or the lower chamber. And what is the difference between the Senate and the House of Commons of the Canadian Constitution in the Philippine Constitution? Well, actually, the legislative branch here in the Philippines is he it has also a Senate, but it is only composed of 24 senators. Okay, but here in Canada, it composes 105 senators that is appointed, while in Philippines, the senators is elected through election. Okay, the House of Representatives here in the Philippines is composed of not more than 250 members. To have a further knowledge, just visit Article 6 of the 1987 Constitution. Okay, so the House of Commons or the lower chamber in Canada is composed of 338 members that is elected to represent the people from their electoral district. It is the House of Commons or the House of Representatives is much like the same, but the difference of it is just the not the members of it. Okay, so Parliament of Canada or the Canada's legislature is the federal institution with the power to make laws, to raise taxes, and to authorize government spending. The Parliament of Canada is bicameral, just like in the Philippines, meaning it has two chambers, the Senate and the House of Commons. So the proposed government legislation is introduced in one of two chambers, usually the House of Commons by a minister. The bills calling for the spending of public revenues or for the imposing of taxes must originate in the House of Commons. Once introduced, a bill is subjected to a detailed process of review, debate, examination, and amendment. Commons also considers items of a private member's businesses. That is, bills and motions proposed by a members who are not cabinet members. So to become a law, all legislation must be adopted by both house in identical form of the received royal assent. So next is, and lastly, to discuss is about the executive branch of the government, which composed of the Prime Minister and the Cabinet. Well, in Canada, the executive authority is vested in the Crown and carried out by the Governor in the Council, the Prime Minister, and the Cabinet. Once appointed, the Prime Minister selects a number of confidential advisors, usually from among the elected members of Parliament belonging to the government party, who are made members of the Privy Council and the sworn in as minister. So it is collectively known as the Minister of Cabinet and are each responsible for individuals' portfolios or departments. Well, actually, it is usually assisted by other members of parliament who have been appointed as parliamentary secretaries. Cabinet is the key decision-making forum in the Canadian government. It leads and directs the executive branch of government. The cabinet acts as an executive council that develops policy to govern the countries and introduce bills to transform these policies into law. So that's all for this video presentation, and thank you for watching. And of course, this video presentation is for educational purposes only, and all the data that I've gathered is came from the legitimate sites of the Canadian um, government structure, and also came from those statistics that I've shown on you about the population rate and about the death of the countries is also in accordance with the Department of Finance of the Canadian government. And that's all. Thank you. Once again, I am Mary Grace Mejias from 2A Political Science North Campus.